Hey folks, I'm here today talking about Saturn in Aquarius or Kumba Rashi in Indian astrology. We have a great opportunity now. The shift has happened where Saturn has moved into Aquarius. We're going to talk briefly today about the differences between Western tropical Aquarius and Vedic Kumba Rashi. Um, and you can see there's some delineations here. I'm also just started a web class that you can register for at saturnshift.com, where I'm going to talk about this shift in great detail, including what it means for you based on your sign, but also a lot of other things that are important, such as, like I say, the difference between the Western astrology sign of Aquarius, the Vedic sign of Kumba, which is ruled by Saturn, very specific attributes in accordance with the Vedic astrology texts, sastras, etc. And then, I'm also going to talk about what is Saturn. If we're going to analyze this, what really is it? A lot of information going around right now about this, and it's great that there's so much consciousness on this, but make sure that, you're getting some good, that the source of the information is as good as it can be. So I'm doing my best here to try to do that. And again, so a big part of that is also what is Saturn, right? And what's the previous transit of Saturn through Aquarius? What happened the last time? And again, these are covered at great length in the web class that I just told you about at saturnshift.com. But also Sade Sati, we now have that, the sort of looming terror. People are now afraid, maybe. And I'm going to explain Sade Sati and also Saturn by transit, how you can see his influence and whatnot. And again, so it's part of the 2023 Saturn in Aquarius web class that you can get. Again, it's free at saturnshift.com. I just got that URL so that it'd be easy to remember it. But again, so this is happening as Saturn, based on the sidereal zodiac, of course, which is the zodiac of India, which is separate from the Western astrology zodiac, which is pinned to the seasons, not to the sky. So the sidereal zodiac is really also called near Ayana, which is the circle without the Ayana or the solstice added. And in that measurement, which is the same one that scientists all around the world use, the only ones that use the quote tropical quote zodiac are Western tropical astrologers. Everyone else uses the sky, and Aquarius means a portion of the sky, right? And so that portion of the sky starts at a certain point. Aries and Ashwini is at the beginning, and then by the time you get around to where we are in the sky now, Saturn has moved into that section of sky called Aquarius. That same sign is called Aquarius in Western tropical astrology, but in Vedic astrology, it's called Kumba. And I'm starting to really just make the distinction here between Western astrology names and that zodiac and the Indian astrological system and those zodiac signs, which are also called Rashis. And just to make the distinction very clearly, because there are a lot of distinct differences, particularly with these later signs in Western astrology, because as it says here, Aquarius in Western astrology, the Western astrology sign is kind of like I'm just using some catchphrases here, and I'm not trying to demean it, but it's kind of like a quirky, eccentric, kind of egghead, nutty professor energy. It's ruled by Uranus. It's symbolized sort of by a long-haired lady pouring water, sort of like a Lady Godiva figure. The Vedic astrology sign of Kumba it's an Indian astrology sign. It's more related to being humble. It's ruled by Saturn, symbolized by a man holding an empty pot. There's no water in the pot. So again, instead of pouring water everywhere, which many think that Aquarius is a water sign, and that includes even Vedic astrology students because of all this water that we see from the Western symbol. It's an empty pot. And, you see the quotes here from Brett Prashra down here. It represents a man holding a pot. The complexion is deep brown, has medium build, is biped Rashi, is very strong in daytime, resorts to deep water. So it does have a connection to deep water, and is airy. It rises with its head and is tamasic in nature. It rules Shudras or workers, and its lord is Saturn. So again, these are things that I break out in the web class that I already mentioned. where you can really learn the deeper truths behind these things, what the transit of Saturn means for you and your rising sign, Saturn and its evolution as it shifts from Capricorn to Aquarius. Again, there's a big shift because it was in Capricorn, which is the reflective feminine quality of Saturn. Now it moves into Aquarius, which is the masculine external identity. And so we're taking that inner thing and bringing it out. So what is that shift? They're both Saturn, but one is inner, one is outer. And again, so Saturn will also be casting aspects at other points in the zodiac, which I'll talk about here in a few minutes. Oops, go up here. Yeah. And so again, what does that mean for you? Health, career, relationships, for your life. And what does it mean if Saturn's going over your natal planets or aspecting them? And what about the dreaded Sade Sati, 7.5 years? People that have their moon in Pisces are already thinking that their Sade Sati just started, even if they don't have any planets in Aquarius, right? So again, we got to be careful, because I think Sade Sati is in many ways one of the most overhyped of all Vedic astrology things that people have to watch out, or watch out. That's happening now. So again, like I said in the previous slide, before, Kumba is the Indian astrology sign. It's humble. It's ruled by Saturn. It's symbolized by a man holding an empty pot with no water in the pot. That tells you a lot about that sign, where that Saturn nature of being humbled, of recognizing all the limitations, and of even being able to compartmentalize and put our feelings aside, where the emotions tend to feel empty. We tend to feel kind of, again, empty of emotion. Again, that's not a bad thing. There are times when that's quite beneficial. Saturn is the part of us that allows us to compartmentalize our feelings and emotions in order to do something. So again, this is a much different frame of reference than the Western Aquarius with the water flowing and the Lady Godiva figure, eccentric, nutty professor, sort of quirky energy. I'm not denigrating one over the other, by the way. I'm just saying it's a very different energy. And so again, it's also airy, or what's called Vata, which is a bit stressed, which is the nature of Saturn. Airy is also sociable. This is where that social contract and that's sort of humanitarian bent comes in with Kumba Rashi. So people who have planets there's this kind of humanitarian, futuristic nature, but it's not because we're a quirky kind of out there. It's often because our personal identity is humbled. And so the thing with Aquarius is, I keep saying Aquarius because that's a sign we're used to, but with the Kumba Rashi is that sort of feeling that we're not so powerful and we're not so important can also tend to gnaw at the person, and they can feel a lack of power, a lack of healthy self-identity and self-will. So that's always the thing that we have to be measuring with Kumba Rashi, and finding those causes where it's something bigger than me, where my personal identity is not the most important thing. Opposite Leo, for example. So again, these are slides right from the hour and 15-minute long presentation that you can get at saturnshift.com. But this is, of course, I also talk, what is Saturn? Because again, we talk about the show, Saturn's going here, and all of a sudden it's just a whole bunch of stuff. But I hear most people, even when they explain Saturn, it can be quite lacking in motivation and richness and depth. So again, Saturn is really the pressure of time and all that goes with it. Again, that means not wasting time. What did the past actually mean? What does the future hold? How can I be present now? Regrets, redemption, loss, commitment, guilt, shame, fear. These are all kinds of things that hang out, and it's not so one-dimensional. It sounds like, oh, these are difficult, bad things. Of course, that's not true. Some of the best lessons you've learned in life were because you were ashamed of what you did, and it was wrong, and you brought punishment and pain to someone just because of your ego and trying to get retribution, and that shame actually taught you were ashamed to not do it again, right? One of the problems we have in the world now is there's no shame. There's no shame even in being caught, like we see it in public officials and in politics and all right now. There's no shame for even being caught in absolute bold-faced lies. We'll just keep lying and lying as long as there's enough people that want our side to win. there'll be almost 50% of people that will believe you no matter what you say. Like, there's no shame. There used to be shame, used to be one of the things that kept us in line. And the last 5 years or so, everything has become utterly shameful, particularly in public life. So again, it's not like it's good when people use shame against you to try to guilt trip you into doing things through shame. Then you've worked through that, and you can only be shamed for things that you're not sure about, right? So again, Saturn it's a huge kind of energy that we process on the emotional, psychological level. So working through these things are very important. And when that moves into the next sign, that kind of residual idea goes into that next area of life. So again, it's also where all shameful pressures can come to manipulate us on the massive scale and whatnot. But all of these things are really up for grabs now. And especially as Saturn has moved out of Capricorn, which is more psychological and emotional, in Aquarius, it's much more externalized now. So it's really the sign even of the populace and the regular people rising to take on, like power structures that are oppressing them and things like that. So that's why there's a humanitarian quality to it, where we feel like we're doing things for people other than just ourselves and for our own personal power. So again, Saturn shows the hard work and effort and the things that are worth sacrificing for and serving, and getting outside of our comfort zone and committing to something bigger than just our own comfort zone. These are a few of the things that happened the previous time Saturn went through Aquarius, March 1993 to June 1995. It was a huge time. In the USA, it was Bill Clinton's first term. Those first couple years was when there was still, he and Hillary Clinton were trying to put forth a very liberal kind of agenda. But then in the middle of that, you had the Republican Revolution and the birth of the modern approach to politics that we have now. The new modern approach to politics, the sort of cutthroat, win at all costs, make no compromises with the other side, really started with Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich in the 1994 midterm elections. Those who lived through that remember a very clear demarcation. Modern politics now is really an outgrowth of that kind of slash and burn. But also things like World Trade Center bombing happened around them. The EU was established, the European Union, huge thing. NAFTA, free trade agreement, huge thing that impacted America and economies in the world, especially in the Americas. The Serb-Croat Bosnia War, the Yugoslavian War happened then. Brady handgun law was enacted. Again, notice the Saturn and Aquarius sort of themes around this time, trying to make things better, especially like internationally and whatnot. European Union, huge. Again, NAFTA free trade agreement, huge, whether you know it or not. Waco Branch Davidian happened at that time. David Koresh, if you remember this. Clinton and Yeltsin signed the Kremlin Accords, which was also what led to dismantling the Ukrainian nukes, which, again, we're still seeing the repercussions of those things now. Kurt Cobain's suicide. People remember that. The Channel opens between France and England under the English Channel. Nelson Mandela inaugurated president in South Africa. Short-lived ceasefire in the Yugoslav war, but that Yugoslavia war, Bosnia, Croat, Serb, happened at that time from 93 to like early 95. Oops. Also, O.J. Simpson, murder, Bronco chase, that whole thing. Jeff Bezos founds Amazon. Major League Baseball strike and the World Series canceled in America. First time since 1906, and the last time it happened, right? So again, huge things. There's a lot of huge stuff going on. Now, the last thing that I wanted to talk about here is that this whole kind of the sort of Sade Sati, the looming terror that you're afraid your Sade Sati is starting, or you're certain it is, or something because you've heard it forever. Again, my feeling is this, and I've been doing this for, close to 20 years, analyzing Sade Sati, Saturn going over the moon, Saturn going in the sign before the moon, with the moon, after the moon, and analyzing this just in a very practical, hands-on, nuts and bolts way. Unless you have a planet in Aquarius, you don't have to worry about Sade Sati starting. If you have the moon in Pisces and there's no planet there in Aquarius, then that part of your emotional process to receive, feel, and integrate is not being pressured at this time. Okay. It winds up being a full like 7.5 years if there are planets, if there's a planet before the moon, with the moon, or after the moon, right? That's really when you see that full pressure, like I have in this diagram. You want to evaluate the term of Sade Sati based on whether or not someone has planets in these adjacent signs to the moon. What we just had was Saturn was in Capricorn. So if someone had a planet in Sagittarius, their Sade Sati would have started then. If people do have a planet in Aquarius, then their moon in Capricorn is still getting the pressure, but it's getting a very specific pressure to the planet after the moon, which is also a very specific part of the emotional psychological process. So when we just indiscriminately, especially assign scary things in a random way where there's no planets there, there's nothing happening, then, frankly, to me, it's really not so helpful. So again, if you have your moon in Capricorn and there's a planet after the moon, then Saturn going over that is pressuring that part of the process. By the way, this is why I just taught an entire course on the moon yogas and the things that influence the moon, so that we can understand our emotional and psychological patterning. And again, that's an incredibly important thing, because Saturn going over the moon it really pressures us to our very foundation. It's not as if Saturn going over the moon isn't real. It's a real thing, but it's incredibly nuanced as well. And so again, I mainly say that if people do have, just like the moon in Pisces, but no planet here in Aquarius, relax. There's nothing getting really pressured there. And in fact, what's often overlooked and mostly overlooked is the planet's aspect by transit, or Saturn's aspect, or all planets' aspect by transit, is really more impactful than this sort of abstract, Sadi Sati, simply because Saturn is in one of those signs adjacent to the moon. Again, if there's no planet there, don't pay attention to it. But you may not have a planet there. Whoops, that was weird. But you have a planet in Aries, or planet in Leo, like I do. I have Mars in Leo, or planet in Scorpio. Saturn is going to be aspecting those planets by transit the whole time, right? And you want to pay attention to exact degrees as Saturn is moving through the sky. So again, it can be necessary. It's just imprecise saying that it's still Sadi Sati. I'm still in my Sadi Sati, even though my moon is in Capricorn and there's no planet in Aquarius. Okay, if you want to think that and you want to still tell yourself this, because again, I don't see it. And when I read charts, as I have for, again, hundreds of people for a couple decades, I read it this way, and they're like, yeah, you're absolutely right. I felt a lot of pressure before, when Saturn went over the planet before the moon. When it was joined the moon, that's when I really felt it the most. And I didn't really feel anything so much after it left. Again, because the planet after the moon is how we integrate those experiences. If you don't have a planet after and you have the moon in Capricorn, you don't have to think like that, okay? But again, you might have planets in Aries, Leo, or Scorpio, and Saturn is always sharing that aspect by transit. So I just want you to pay attention to things like this. And again, I've been doing this a long time, and I also, have done some posts on social media talking about this. Pretty much down the line consensus, people reflect that back, that, yeah, now that I look back on it, it was really when I really felt it was when Saturn was on one of those planets before, or of course joined the moon, or after, or whatever part of the process is there. So again, I sort of have some fun with it. And sometimes people don't like I say this, because a lot of people do say it and they think I'm being arrogant. I'm not trying to be arrogant or try to be the only one who knows the truth, because I think people are trying to help each other. But I think people should also be more discriminate and pay close attention to what they're sharing, so especially if you haven't done all of these readings all these years and done all of these case studies. Are you sure putting that out there is actually true? Because again, I also wind up hearing from a lot of people now, who are often freaked out and worried about the latest shift, because they've heard it. It's so ubiquitous now. It's so much out there everywhere that, okay, your Sadi Sati is starting. I know it now. I'm scared. It's like, it's very roughshod and sort of random and quite unnecessary. So again, be careful spreading those things, because it might be spreading things that aren't really playing out the way you think, and you might be unnecessarily burdening people. I definitely deal with those types quite a lot. So aside from that, look, again, if you do want to see deeper in these things, then I do have the this class, saturnshift.com, free class there. And again, I talk about all of those things that I went over here somewhat briefly. I mean, this is a 20-minute video here, but I go into much greater depth, about an hour and 15 minutes, talking about all these things in greater depth and how we're shifting, especially a lot of the cultural shifts. Spent a lot of time talking about that and the sense of hopeful politics actually that happened in the 93 to 95 window. There was actually a time where there was a lot of hopeful, and not just hopeful energy, but progress made. Again, you could look at a couple things, and I'll just say it like this, particularly things like the European Union. Now, again, maybe you have opinions about globalism and all this. I'm not getting into the merits of it. I'm saying how we were acting. We're acting in a spirit of trying to come together as like one world, even like NAFTA, the free trade agreement. It was devastating with certain types of jobs, but it also opened up a lot of opportunities. But it's an international kind of forward-thinking, progressive agenda. And again, with the U.S. elections in 92, when Clinton won, at least there was young energy. They were younger. They were in their mid to late 40s. Clinton, I think, was 47 or something, Bill, and then Hillary Clinton. This was after 12 years of conservative politics in America, Ronald Reagan and George Bush first. There was that sense that, okay, now there's some new energy here and some new possibility. That is reflected in what I'm seeing now and what I'm anticipating and sensing and predicting for the next couple of years after the intensity of Capricorn and the sort of COVID era and the hunkering down mentality. After that, we're now ready to move on to something that is less intense and less emotionally heavy and dominating and domineering, and something that's more, that senses the possibility and that we've just been through something difficult and we're on to something new. Again, that was a big part of the zeitgeist in 93. I happened to be, it's interesting because I happened to be in Paris at the time of the World Trade Center bombing, which was one of the things that also happened in early 93. I was there when the bombing happened in New York City and had to fly back into America. And I flew in through Dulles in DC. Again, this was 1993. And it was an international flight from Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris, which of course is an international hub. And I just remember how intense all of the customs was. Even for me, this was 1993 because I had flown to Europe the year before, and it was much more lax at that time, of course. But right after the World Trade Center bombing, the first one in 93, you also saw this heightened international security. And again, so you could see these things also simultaneous with each other, a sense of hope for something, the new, progress, a new Europe, the Maastricht Treaty, the European Union. And again, I was in France, and I was in France the summer before. The people were like, Europeans are never going to come together over this. When I went to France, I still had to use francs when I was in France, lira when I went to Italy, pesetos when I went to Spain. It was all different currencies. I tell you, that was crazy. Traveling around Europe at that time was insane because of the different currencies. So, centralizing the EU around the euro but it was something that they never thought would really come together. It seemed like a pipe dream. Even 6 months earlier, but when I was in Europe, people were like, and part of the reason is because the countries were very different. When you're in France, the trains run on time. And you understand why they say things like the trains run on time relative to different countries in Europe. Back then, especially, I don't know about now, but back then you could tell because in France, the trains ran on time. You go to Italy, maybe Spain, forget it. You're lucky if the train even comes. And I literally had that happen. So trying to bring these countries together at that time was like you had strong economies like France and Great Britain didn't want to absorb the economies of like Greece and Spain. It's like these people sleep all day. Get them up. I don't want the franc to be supporting the peseta or the lira. Anyway, it was crazy back then. But in the spirit of trying to come together for a common and universal trading bloc, it was all about economics. So again, I'm talking about these things because it's the same issues right now. We have all these economic issues are also going to be very prominent and prevalent now. We have, again, look at all of the currencies that were floated during COVID and all of this stuff and what we have been doing with currencies, not to mention blockchain currencies and international monetary policies are just on the teetering point right now. And it could definitely show where we could have a big crisis and the opportunity to come together around it. But again, we're 30 years out from things like NAFTA, which was part of globalization. Let's put it this way. In 93, a huge push towards what we would call globalization really happened in the monetary sectors. With, again, NAFTA, the EU was created to allow for these trading blocs to have more leverage and to compete with each other. So again, you could see how this is very much Aquarius, Saturn type of, this will be a future, this will be for the upliftment of everyone, which again, that's the ideal, but that's not what winds up happening because you have greed and profit motive and globalization with corporations and stuff too now. And although it's lifted poorer countries out of what was a certain poverty level, it's impoverished them in other ways by removing diversity and turning everything into a corporate fascist global, sort of monetary system. And again, that didn't just happen when COVID started. That's been happening for 30 years. And again, this sort of globalist corporatocracy that revolves around, weapons and oil and agribusiness and all this has been going on for decades. And so Saturn going through Capricorn really revealed a lot of it in something as simple as a vaccine or something like that. Now we've seen this and been triggered by it a lot. What are we going to do? So these next couple years of Saturn moving through Aquarius, these type of themes are going to be more and more front and center, and the power of the people to actually enact something that's more universal is there. Now, again, that assumes that people can wake up and see the truth and understand these things and see beyond the manipulation and the propaganda and the false choices that we're given politically and all of that stuff. But that's where we're at, I would say, if you look at that socially. And so, but on a personal level and all, relative to everyone's spiritual practices and, personal growth and whatnot, you should definitely check out the SaturnShift.com presentation, because I go into all these things in greater detail around the real meaning of these indicators. I elaborate in much greater detail, and I have what this shift of Saturn in Aquarius means for your sign as well. So I appreciate you showing up here today.
Be prepared for 2023 by getting my free 2023 Vedic astrology forecast. I'll talk about the 10 biggest shifts for you and how Saturn moving into Aquarius will affect your sign in 2023 especially. But I'll also talk about just the 10 most important shifts for everyone throughout the year. This is just a general forecast. We have big shifts coming in January. Then we have big important shifts happening in April when we have the eclipses. And then in the summer with a lot of intense shifts through Leo, including Venus retrograde. Then you can also get your personal 2023 forecast. You can actually get it for all 12 signs or your individual sign. That's where I take these 10 or 11 most important shifts from the general forecast and I apply them to your sign. So go ahead and register for the free 2023 cast and then also your sign, or even get all 12 sign forecasts.